A very good evening and a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Gugulethu Cele. Now, many South Africans find themselves facing the issue of debt, and having to face the music by tackling the money they owe could see some needing debt counselling. Paul Slot, President of the Debt Counsellors Association, joins me now for more. Such a pleasure to have you with us this evening to deal with this dreaded D word that is debt. Let's start on the issue of debt in South Africa and how dire the situation is for many South Africans out there.
Well, from a high-level summary, there are about 22.5 million consumers that make use of debt, and about 10 million of them find it difficult to meet their debt repayments on a daily basis or a monthly basis. So there are many consumers that are battling to actually make the debt repayments on a monthly basis, and you can roughly divide that 10 million in three categories. The first third of that 10 million will be able to battle through the debt themselves. The second third will need some assistance, but they don't need debt counselling. The last third actually need active help to actually get them through the process. So although there's 10 million people, a lot of consumers, if they want to, can actually do it themselves.
Tell us about that, the last two-thirds that you alluded to, especially the ones that might need assistance and debt counselling. When do you know when the situation is that bad?
Okay. Officially, what they say is that when you're unable to repay your debt, you're in trouble. But that doesn't help us. I think there are some warning signs. The first is when you actually say, I need another loan to repay existing debt. The second sign that might lead to it is when you actually cancel your short-term insurance or you downgrade your medical aid to actually make ends meet. The third aspect is when you simply start stopping payments on certain things like school fees, like policies and things like that.
Which gets you into more trouble.
Trouble. So consumers ignore those signs, and the first reaction of the consumer is, I need more debt. I need more debt to repay the existing debt. And that's where we actually start with the problem to say, the consumer is normally the first to know that they're in trouble, but they're normally the last to take action. And if we can change that in South Africa, I think we'll achieve a lot.
And this is where debt counselling comes into play. At what point do you take on debt counselling, and the good, the bad and the ugly of it? What's the initial step when one seeks this kind of solution?
Normally there are two entry points. Obviously, the sooner you enter into debt counselling, the easier it is to actually resolve the situation, or the shorter the period you'll be under debt review. So there's one point where you can actually say, I'm in trouble, I need assistance. Or secondly, there's a point where you have received a Section 129 notice from a credit provider who actually says, pay up the debt or go and see a debt counsellor. Now, with the amendment of the Act, you have 10 days to actually go and see a debt counsellor and say, help me through this process. So to summarize, 2 points, self-identification, which is preferred, and second one, if you're pushed into debt counselling by a credit provider saying, pay up the money in terms of the Section 129 notice.
And in finding a debt counsellor, does this need to be somebody who's registered with a certain association?
No, debt counsellors have to be registered with the National Credit Regulator. You can go onto their website as well. And there's about 3,400 debt counsellors that are registered, but probably only about 800 are active at this point in time. So to find an active debt counsellor, you can also go to the NCHR's website or to the CASA's website to find an active debt counsellor. And it's important to actually not take the first one that you see on the list. You must make sure that they're active, they are registered, they actually make use of a payment distribution agency. Ask them of their recent successes, ask them how many court orders they have obtained. It's important to make sure that you are with a debt counsellor that knows what they're doing.
Exactly. Now, obviously, this service comes at a fee in itself, so it almost seems as though you're paying money for someone to help you stop paying too much money to the debts that you have. In that first meeting and consultation and the follow-ups thereafter, when it comes to pricing and costs, as well as the monitoring of the performance of the debt counsellor, what does one need to take into consideration?
Before a consumer applies for debt counselling, something else needs to happen. Is that you need to actually add up all the debt. Then the debt counsellor would normally do an assessment of the financial means of that consumer to say, what is my income? And let's do a budget for you, and let's actually see if you have sufficient funds to repay after we've you've actually set aside the budget. So there's no means setting up a budget for a consumer that will lead you to destruction. So there must be a responsible budget, but leaving enough money to actually repay your debt. And once that amount has been established, then the process can start, where we say, let's actually see what structure or what repayment structure can be put into place. Now, what is very important is that the credit providers have come to the party, and when you sit with that consumer, you can test if the concessions that are agreed to by the credit providers is applicable. Let me explain. First of all, the credit providers will waive the monthly fee of 50 Rand per credit agreement. So that's a reduction from 50 Rand to 0. Secondly, is the credit provider will actually reduce interest rates from wherever they are to a fee that matches your affordability. But it could go down to 0. And thirdly, they will extend the period to a pre-agreed period. So that in itself will help the consumer to reduce repayments by about 39%. So that in itself is a great assistance to the consumer to say, let's see if that benefit applies to me. Aim is to actually get the consumer out of debt review within 60 months, but our experience is that once they make use of the benefits that have been provided by the credit providers, they manage that process in a lesser period, probably about 35 months. So why is that? And because when somebody applies for debt review, the stress levels are this high. And they don't know what to do. They actually get phone calls from credit providers to say, pay the money. And there's fights at homes. And they actually accept the debt review. Stress levels goes down. Their productivity increases. They actually get the income, and they actually manage the process better, and they manage to pay more. So the process is such that if you pay more, you're not penalized. You actually, the period is reduced. So that in itself helps the process. But so the fee of structure for it is built into the debt counselling process. So there's an upfront fee, and there's a monthly fee that's payable, and there's also legal fee payables, but nothing is paid upfront other than the 50 Rand that's required in terms of the National Credit Act that's now amended. And then there's a restructuring fee or a professional fee that's payable, but it's part of the repayment stream. So credit providers have agreed not to stand back for the first month where the fees are payable, and then the monthly aftercare is payable with the consumer's payment to the credit provider. So a single amount is collected via the payment distribution agency, and that is then paid over to the credit providers on a monthly basis.
It almost sounds like a win-win situation where the very same people who lent you this money are actually trying to help you and make it easier for you to actually pay back this money. But I want to touch on the credit reports. Is this something that you need to consistently monitor when you're under the process of debt counselling or debt review? And the outcome at the end, does it necessarily guarantee that you won't be blacklisted further?
Well, obviously every consumer has to actually check their credit report on a monthly basis, because your payment records are reflected there on a monthly basis, and the worse your payments is, the more difficult it will become to actually get more credit. But once you apply for debt review, you are listed on the credit bureau. There's a flag to say you're under debt review, and the purpose of that is to stop you from lending more money or from credit providers giving you more money. So we're saying let's freeze the debt situation and let's go through a period of repayment. But the nice thing here is that the consumer is in control, because although there's a flag on it, the moment you have repaid the debt, that flag can be lifted. And now with the amendment of the Act, it is a great opportunity, because previously all of it had to be repaid. With the amendment that came through last week Friday, it's such that once you've repaid the short-term debt and you're able to maintain the repayments of your home loan and your long-term debt, the debt review flag can be lifted. So if you actually if you're in a position to repay the short-term debt over a shorter period, debt review flag is lifted and you're clean. And then you end up with a clean credit report. That's what we all want.
Exactly. Well, we've come to that time of the show where we need to review everything that has been said. Paul, maybe if we can put it into 5 substantial bullet points for consumers at home to leave the show knowing today about debt counselling as well as debt review. What are they?
I think the first one is to manage your budget. If your debt repayments is less than 35% of your take-home pay, the light is green. And you're fine. If your debt repayments is below 50% but more than 35%, orange light. You need to take some action to actually reduce your debt. If your debt repayments is more than 50% of your take-home pay, the red is light. The light is red, and you need to load shed some of your debt, and you need an action plan to actually make it happen. The sooner you take that action, the better. Go to a debt counsellor, structure the debt, and make monthly payments thereafter in terms of making it happen. It's not always easy to actually start that process, but once you're in it, it's fantastic. What we are seeing is that debt counselling has now been around since 2007, and we see hundreds of clients, thousands of clients now who have completed the process, and the response is, I feel good about it, what I've done, because I've done it for myself. So 3 steps: check your budget, decide to go for debt counselling, make sure you get the benefits that the credit providers are offering, make monthly payments, and get to that clearance certificate point as quickly as possible. Exactly.
Well, you've summed it up really nicely for us. It all begins with that capital B word, budget, that everyone dreads. And make sure that you go out there, seek advice, and always ensure that you do make a follow-up on the debt counsellors that you're looking to have assist you in the program, as mentioned by Paul. But that's where we leave it for Personal Finance this evening. Quite a bit that we've learned. Thanks once more to Paul Slot. He's the president of the Debt Counsellors Association of South Africa. Now, do remember that we want to hear from you, so get in touch. Send us a tweet or any of your comments to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410, or to myself @Kukumfupi on Twitter. Until next time, have a wonderful evening.